Hello, everyone, and welcome to Workshop 3A, Creating Inclusive Classrooms for Transgender and Non-Binary Students with Amy Ort and Abby Mitchell. Before we get started, I just want to go through a few housekeeping details. First, this is a workshop, so we're going to be active. If you do not want your image captured, you're welcome to keep your camera off. That's quite all right. If you don't want your voice to be captured, please use the chat and either the panelists or myself will be happy to repeat your question. So for the benefit of those watching the recording. And to that end, we hope that you will use the chat. So put your questions, your comments, any resources you want to share about things that are similar at your institution. We'd love to have that as well. Last but not least, if you want or need the captions, they are active. So go down to that Zoom toolbar at the bottom of the Zoom window and click the Show Captions button and save it with the language that you prefer. Or if your screen is slightly minimized, click the More button with the 3 dots and the captions option will be on the menu that pops up. So without further ado, I hand the microphone over to Amy and Abby. Take it away.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. So I'm Abby Mitchell. I use they, them pronouns. I'm presenting with my colleague, Amy Ort, who uses she, her pronouns. We both work at the Center for Transformative Teaching at University of Nebraska, Lincoln. So we're going to talk to you today about creating an inclusive classroom for transgender and non-binary students. So a few kind of expectations that we have about kind of the structure today to kind of let you know what to expect. Our slides contain linked resources that you can use, and we'll share those. So you can go back and kind of find out more as you're interested. Also, I already said, just to reiterate, put questions in the chat throughout. We want this to be kind of interactive, so feel free to be asking those questions. We'll also try to save some time at the end for questions as well. This is also a learning space, not a judgment space. So the whole point of what we're doing today is to learn from each other. And so sometimes, particularly with this topic, people can be concerned about, am I saying the right things? Like, I don't want to be offensive. And those are really good kind of inclinations, but they can sometimes prevent us from learning and kind of taking the risk that we need for good learning. So please feel free to ask questions. Don't worry about getting the wording exactly right. Also, finally, a note on the use of the word queer. So at some points through the presentation, we're going to use the word queer. And how we are using it, we mean kind of anybody in the LGBTQ plus sort of spectrum. The word queer has a really interesting history and was used as a slur for a long time. But the LGBTQ plus community has kind of reclaimed the word. And so it kind of describes anyone within that community. So it could refer to gender identity, it could refer to sexual orientation. It is a word that, because it used to be a slur, is still a slur in some contexts. You have to use very carefully. So we'll use it here because it's kind of easy to say. But this is something where you only want to call someone queer if they're self-identifying to you as queer first. And this is a word that's commonly used within the community, but for people who are cisgender and straight, use with caution and make sure you're being kind of respectful of the needs of the community with that. Also, a few kind of conceptual things that we wanted you to keep in mind as we're talking today. The identities and experiences that we're talking about are influenced by the intersection of many different identities. So we're focused on gender identity, but people's gender identity is very much influenced by their race, their sex assigned at birth, their socioeconomic status, a whole range of different factors. So this isn't kind of a unified group. This is a lot of different experiences. So I like to think of it as like when you go and get paint at the hardware store and they're like, mixing up for your exact color. And, they're putting in, starts with kind of the white paint, and then you're putting in a little bit of this color, a little bit of this color, a little bit of this color, mixing it all up, and it creates a unique color for the combination of all of those identities. So I think that's a great metaphor for understanding this. So it isn't just the addition of identities, it's how they uniquely combine to shape people's experiences. Also, I think when we're talking about groups, it can be really easy to think about everybody in that group is the same. That is very much not the case. There's a huge amount of diversity between groups. So, for example, there can be a lot of variability between the experiences of gay men and lesbians, for example. But also there's a lot of variation within identity groups. So for example, among people who are non-binary, that can look a whole lot of different ways. Some people will get surgery, some won't, some will be on hormones, some won't. So keep in mind that kind of rich diversity here. So it's made up of a whole group of individuals with different perspectives. There are also, I think, here really special considerations for queer instructors in that I think all of these tips are a little bit more complicated in that you also have to keep in mind about, are you out to your students? What are the pros and cons of doing that? The impact that like microaggressions in the classroom can have on you and how to kind of protect yourself in those situations. So those are things that we won't have as much time to get into today, but we can definitely talk about more if people are interested. So this is an area where I've been doing work for a long time, but I think it's particularly relevant right now. And so why we wanted to give this presentation now is because of some things that are affecting the cultural climate. And there's a lot of different things that we could look at. We chose to kind of focus on two. So the first is some of the newer proposed legislation that is happening this year. So in 2023, in US state legislatures, there are 469 anti-LGBTQA plus bills in 46 states. So I gave a similar presentation 2 weeks ago. This has gone up 17 bills in a two-week period. So it's something that is really happening in the legislatures in the US right now. This is also concerning for our students because 86% of trans and or non-binary youth reported negative mental health effects from the legislation. And this wasn't necessarily the legislation being passed, just the legislation being proposed had this effect. So this is having kind of a serious effect on students within the places that we serve, and looking at how can we best help to support those students and reduce kind of the negative effects so they can still be successful in the classroom. Also, in terms of hate crimes, we don't have super recent data. The last FBI data that was released on this was from 2021. From other data, this is probably higher at this point for this year. But there were 1,373 hate crimes against queer people in 2021. This made up 19% of all hate crimes that happened in the United States. We also see that component of different identities combining in that they're very different rates for different groups. So if you look specifically at queer people who were murdered, 91% of those were Black, and over half of those were Black trans women. So there are some groups that are particularly at risk, particularly vulnerable. So what we're going to talk about today is kind of focus on just 4 kind of tips, best practices for ways to be able to help support trans and non-binary students. So we'll start with talking about appropriate terminology, building an inclusive syllabus, creating a welcoming environment, and responding to microaggressions. So we're going to start with using appropriate terminology. So using appropriate terminology is really important. One, it signals to students that you have kind of an understanding of the issues, and they feel more comfortable feeling like they might be accepted within that environment. But to do that, you need to know the proper terminology as well. So we aren't going to go into like a lot of the terminology here today. A lot of you are probably familiar with at least some of it. But we give some links to some definitions of a lot of the terminology in the area. Another great way that you can use, if it's relevant to teach this in your courses, is the gender unicorn. Can be a great tool to talk about this with your students. And basically it talks about gender identity as 3 different kind of sliding scales. And so everyone falls somewhere on these 3 sliding scales. So maybe someone really feels that they're both female and male, or feels like they're not really female or male, but they're very much another kind of gender identity. This also makes the point that gender expression is separate from gender identity. So someone can present in very masculine, feminine, or androgynous ways that has nothing to do with kind of how they feel inside, how they identify. And it also shows sex assigned at birth and sexual orientation, who people are physically attracted to and emotionally attracted to. So recommending using this, I think it can really help students get a good grasp on these concepts. Also, another big focus here is using appropriate pronouns. So basically, pronouns are words that substitute for nouns. We use them all the time without kind of thinking about it. And so there are kind of this growing number of different pronouns that you can use to refer to different people. It used to be just she and he, but now we're seeing kind of this really increase. So they is increasingly being used. You also see Z and here, A and M. So these are probably the most commonly one used. This is not an exhaustive list at all, but these are some of the most commonly one being used. So we wanted to kind of present these and kind of practice using these a little bit. Because when you're first learning, it can be easy to kind of get these wrong. Practice helps. The only good way to learn them is just to practice them. So you can see here, pronouns can be used in kind of a variety of different ways: as a subject, as an object, possessive pronoun, or reflexive. So there's kind of a variety of the pronouns there. So I want you to kind of like take just a minute and look and see, okay, how, if you're using, say, they, them, how might you kind of fill these in? All right. So for the first one, for the subject, you would just say they laughed at the notion of a gender binary. For the object, they tried to convince them that asexuality does not exist. For the possessive, their favorite color is unknown. Possessive pronoun, the pronoun part is theirs. And for reflexive, they think highly of themselves. So that would be some examples of how you would use these. So now I want to turn it over to Amy, and she'll talk more about building an inclusive syllabus.
Yeah, so a syllabus is in a lot of ways our introduction to our students. So before they even show up on the first day, often they're getting in our learning management system. They're reading the syllabus to figure out, what books do I need for the course? What kind of things can I, expect to happen? What do the assignments look like? But they're also using it to get a feel for who are we as an instructor? Who can I expect to be showing up in the classroom? And how comfortable can I expect to be when I show up to the classroom? So a few tips for kind of what you can do to really signal to your students on that syllabus that you care a lot. First is really to show your support, to think really carefully about your language, about word choice, and really thinking about how to signal support to your students. And this is important. So the article that I have linked here is some work from Central Michigan University, where they brought together panels of students of all kinds of different backgrounds. And the number one resounding thing that came out of that is how much students are using to get information about who they expect the instructor to be, what they expect the classroom to feel like, and how important it is for instructors to really be thinking about this. So pay really, really, really careful attention to the tone throughout your syllabus. So is there a lot of thou shalt not under any circumstances engage in these particular behaviors? Is there a lot of if you don't show up to class, all of these terrible things are going to happen, and you will automatically lose points for turning things in late, right? Are you really signaling to students that they should be afraid of this course? Or are you using your language to say, hey, I'm here to support you. I'm here to help you. The course is going to be difficult. I'm going to hold you to high standards, but I'm going to be here to help and support you. So the best thing that you can do here is really read through the syllabus through a student lens, right? So pretend that you are a student that is new to this university, and read through that syllabus and think about, how would you feel walking into that class on the first day, right? What would you expect it to feel like? Who would you expect the instructor to be? And if you have if you have someone available, find a first year student that hasn't taken this course before, have them read through the syllabus and kind of have that conversation about, how would you feel walking into this course? So either do it yourself or, find an actual, first or second year student to kind of read through your syllabus for that really the tone of what's going on. And, another thing that you can really do here, particularly to signal your support to the LGBTQ students, is to just put your pronouns on the syllabus. And I know some of you may be in spaces where it's not necessarily comfortable to do that. I was reading a news article the other day about faculty getting fired just for, sharing their pronouns in their email signature. So you may not be in a space where this is a thing you can do, but as much as possible, putting those pronouns on your syllabus tells those students that you are going to be supportive of trans and non-binary students, right? Because nobody is putting their pronouns out there if they're not doing it as a way of signaling support to those communities. So that's just a really, really quick and easy thing that you can do. And then, right, and the last thing here is really, as much as possible, using that universal design for learning lens to give your students choice when it comes to topic and assessment, because allowing students to take class materials and connect it to stuff that they care about, allowing them to go out and seek out research from trans and non-binary, folks that are in the discipline and doing research, it is really going to allow them to see themselves in the discipline, to see that they belong. And those feelings of belonging are essential for ensuring that our students persist at the university and come back semester to semester. And then kind of our last main suggestion here is just making sure that you're making resources available to students. So maybe this means actually adding a section to your syllabus. Maybe it means posting this information in your learning management system, wherever you can make it available to students, making sure that you're connecting them with the resources that are available. Right, so if you have an LGBTQIA resource center on campus, right, making sure that you're including that information, so a link to where they can connect with those folks on campus. And that's, if it's applicable, so if you don't have one of those, clearly you can't do that, but also making sure that you're connecting them with the counseling center. So we know that rates of anxiety and depression and other mental health challenges are really prevalent among our queer students. And so making sure that we're connecting folks with the counseling center is really important. Particularly if you don't have an LGBTQIA resource center on campus, posting information about local resources, so ways that they can build community outside of the university and what kinds of resources may be available is very important. And then connecting them with national resources as well. So putting a link to the Trevor Project, which has tons of support and help resources available. And then finally, this resource, the Transgender Teaching Institute community resources, is just a fantastic list of all kinds of resources for students of different parts of the LGBTQIA spectrum, for things from legal defense to help with health and counseling and all kinds of resources. So making those kind of resources available really signals your support, but also ensures that if students are having challenges, that they can find the help that they need. And finally, if your university has gender inclusive restrooms, just taking time at the beginning of the semester to let them know where the nearest one is particularly important. We know that, around half of trans people suffer from some kind of bowel disorder because they spend so much time holding things in because they don't know where a safe restroom might be. So this is a really practical, easy thing that you can do to signal, hey, this is a thing that you are going to need because you are a human. Here is where you can do it in a safe way.
Right, so as Amy mentioned, creating a welcoming environment is really, really important. And so we wanted to give some more specific tips on how faculty and instructors can do that. So we're going to start off with the beginning of the semester. The beginning is a good place to start. Giving your pronouns. For example, we gave ours at the beginning. That can be good kind of modeling and saying, okay, that this is kind of a normative thing. It is particularly important for cisgender people to give their pronouns, because if the only people giving their pronouns are trans and non-binary folks, then it really signals them out in kind of some painful ways. Also, offering the opportunity for students to share can be really helpful. I think I would urge a little bit of caution in how you do this, because you don't want to put students on the spot here. You don't want students to feel like they need to be outed, things like that. So a couple different ways you can do it is you can say that students can share their pronouns when they do introductions if they feel comfortable doing so. Another thing that I've used a lot is I have students kind of complete an information sheet so I can get to know them on a whole bunch of different levels. And then in that I ask them, what pronouns do you want me to use for you in this class? So if they're questioning or if they're not ready to be out yet, they're not feeling like they have to declare their gender identity, but I still know what to call them in that particular context. Also, avoid making assumptions about students. So we can often assume that students who present in sort of gender non-conforming ways are more likely to be the trans and non-binary students, and that can be true, but not always. So I know I've definitely had students where I'm like, okay, maybe they might be trans or non-binary and I was wrong. I've also had students where they seemed totally cisgender to me and they were not. So don't make those assumptions. And a lot of people can think, oh, I don't have trans and non-binary students in my classes. You don't necessarily know. With the statistics, you likely do. So appearance does not equal identity. Also, a partner's gender doesn't equal sexual orientation. So if a student is dating a man, right, then that doesn't mean that that equals their sexual orientation. So there could be a whole lot of reasons that that wouldn't be a fit for them. They could be bisexual, and that partner could just not fit with their sexual orientation overall. People's background knowledge in this area can also vary quite a bit. And so assessing where students are at, their previous knowledge, and then filling in foundational knowledge when you're addressing kind of topics related to gender identity can be really helpful. So one way that you can do this is something called a snapshot activity. And this is an activity where on the first day of class, you give each student a note card. And then you put a prompt up at the front of the class asking them to indicate, what do you know about transgender people? And then also then on the other side, asking them, what do you want to know? So the what do you knows gives you a sense of where people are. You can also do this outside of class too, as an assignment or as a discussion post or otherwise. I like to do this anonymously so people don't feel kind of put on the spot. But then you have a whole kind of host of questions, topics that you can pull from that help you see where students at, how can I best address what they're interested in. Sometimes too, depending on the relevance to the particular course, I'll keep those and then just occasionally throughout the semester pull one out. Like, okay, let's talk about this for a little bit. It shows to students that you're responding to them and their unique needs, which helps engage everyone in the classroom. You can also give students an ungraded quiz to kind of see where they're at. Make very clear to them that it is ungraded because students tend to kind of freak out about quizzes. So make that clear. You don't want them to feel that pressure around this. So both at the beginning and then continually throughout the semester, normalizing respectful disagreement and setting guidelines for discussion can be really, really helpful. So with the normalizing respectful disagreement, I always have kind of a part in my syllabus where I talk about that. I also tell students that disagreeing with other students in the class is okay. Disagreeing with me is okay. And I tell them that I don't want them to think like I think. My role, my job is to get you to think critically, to get you to think about how you're using evidence. So I don't care what you're arguing for, as long as you're, using good critical thinking skills and using evidence well. And I think that can really help reduce some of the defensiveness that students can sometimes feel about topics such as this. The setting the guidelines for discussion can also help students sort of feel safe because they know kind of what to expect if a student kind of violates those guidelines and can feel a little bit more protected. It's also really good for those guidelines to have consequences. So if someone breaks this guideline, then what's going to happen in the course? So that students have a very tangible idea. If something like this does come up in the classroom too, it makes it a lot easier for you as an instructor to then address that because there's a clear, okay, we're following these policies. This is a violation of these policies in this ways. And so here, what happens? Also teaching students appropriate language to use. You not only want to model that, but also I'm kind of teaching students so that they're using it in the classroom. And so trans and non-binary students are not having to hear their peers using kind of the wrong terminology throughout the course. Infusing gender diversity in course content, even if you're not necessarily talking about gender identity. So using pictures that show a diverse group of people in terms of gender and other identities as well. Using examples of a whole variety as well. So making sure that your course is kind of reflective of all the diversity of the students that is out there. And finally, subtly showing your support. So things like having an ally sticker, giving your pronouns in your, email signature. Kind of queer students are looking for those things. They will notice them very, very quickly because they're wanting to see, okay, am I safe? Is this professor going to be accepting or not? So cisgender students might not notice it. Your queer students very much will.
All right, so the last topic here is probably the one that I have the most instructors that are concerned about, right? So the rest of what we've talked about are things that are very much under the instructor's control, right? They're things that you can do preemptively, but the real concern, I think, is and fear is, okay, but what happens if someone else in the classroom kind of creates an unsafe environment, engages in a microaggression? What can I do in the moment? What am I supposed to do in the moment to really sort of fix those kind of situations? So this is kind of a tricky one, right? Because a lot of it comes down to your assessment of the situation, right? What exactly you should do depends on what happened, who's in the classroom, how did other students respond, what kind of tone have you previously set in the classroom. So we don't really have, a specific, always do these particular things in every kind of situation. But what we're gonna talk through here is just kind of some general guidelines, some things that you might want to try, kind of depending on the situation, right? So the first thing is to kind of stay calm, right? And I know this is kind of a silly thing to suggest, because if you're not already calm, like trying to calm yourself back down isn't always the easiest thing. But the more that you can rehearse these things ahead of time, the more that you can think about what the possibilities are and how to respond to them and mentally rehearse, the easier it's going to become to stay calm kind of in that moment. So making sure that you're really thinking about these things ahead of time, and if you're opening up a conversation, recognizing what might happen, and that your responsibility is to ensure that you're keeping all of your students safe. Often a useful tactic here is to use kind of an inquiry framework, right? So not immediately jumping to that was a problem, don't say things like that in my classroom, right? But to kind of take a step back and ask, why did you say that, right? What makes you think that? So if your students are saying something like, I don't think that children should be allowed to be around trans people, or I don't think drag queens should be allowed to exist, right? If they're saying these kind of things that are pretty obviously problematic from your perspective, but really exist in our wider culture, right? These are things that people throw out all the time. Just kind of stepping back and saying, what makes you say that? Where does that belief come from? Where, who might have sort of where did that belief come from, sort of within yourself, and asking them to kind of do that kind of self-reflection. And then along that line is kind of asking them to do some perspective taking, right? So, it's entirely possible that we have trans students in our course. We may have some students that do drag in their free time. What might it feel like for those students if they're in this classroom? Is there maybe another way that you could phrase that that might feel a little bit less problematic from their perspective, right? So getting them to think a little bit about, okay, right, because often they're not thinking about the possibility of trans people actually existing in the classroom with them. So just asking them, hey, what if there was actually a trans person here? Would you really be saying the same thing? Right, and then, right, leading that into a conversation about, why that's problematic. And sometimes, you know, other students will actually jump in here. So opening this up to a conversation of, hey, what might other perspectives be on this topic? How might other people feel? And that'll kind of lead it into a conversation about, okay, this is why, you know, that particular language or that particular phrase is a problem, and really give students time to process, right? The idea here is to really take up time and space for these conversations. If you just in the beginning say, that is a problem, do not use that language in my classroom, it really avoids students from processing why that's a problem and letting them really learn and grow from the experience. Right, and then as they're doing this, really letting students kind of productively re-engage, right? So saying, okay, given all of this, would you like to rephrase what you originally said? Would you like to take the opportunity to you know, say something else or give a different answer to the question, or you know, think to really talk about what you've learned from this conversation, right? So having the students kind of sum up, hey, what is the result of this conversation? How might we move forward as a class from this particular space? Right, the final piece here is that once this discussion wraps up in the classroom, you're not done, right? It's really important to follow up with first the student that, you know, initially engaged in the microaggression, to just say, hey, I know this could have been a really difficult conversation for you. I know you might be feeling put on the spot. You know, is there anything you'd like to say to me? Would you like to meet up and talk more about this? Just to really reach out and show that you're there to help them grow and you're also willing to engage in that conversation, right? Also, if you have, you know, trans and non-binary students in the class, or if you have other students that were visibly upset from this, individually reaching out and saying, hey, I know that what happened in class today was maybe a little bit upsetting. Are there other ways that you would like me to address this in the future, right? So recognizing I may have messed this up. I may not have led this conversation personally. Do you have ideas for what I could do again in the future to really empower those students and let them feel like, you know, the classroom really is a safe space for them to exist and express themselves. So following up afterwards, and maybe this is something that, you know, you come back to a full class conversation the next time and say, hey, I heard from a lot of students, this is what I was hearing, this is what we're going to do differently going forward. Right, and then our last piece of advice is, you know, okay, what happens if you're the one, right? What happens if you're the one that accidentally misgenders someone or uses, you know, the wrong term for something, right? And usually this is the real fear for instructors, right? They may avoid calling on or referring to specific students because they're afraid of making a mistake. It's okay, right? Everyone makes mistakes. Often we make mistakes in front of other people. This is a real thing that happens in the world, and that's okay, right? So if possible, respond quickly, and this is where kind of rehearsing this in your own head can help. So just noticing and saying, you know, oh, sorry, right? I meant they, and, you know, if you misgender a student, okay, sorry, I meant they, right? Doing that really quick, quiet correction can go a really long way. You know, apologize, say, you know, sorry, this is what I meant to say, and then move forward, right? Do not over apologize, because when you sit there and go, oh, I am so sorry, I did not mean to misgender you, I promise it won't happen again. What you're doing is putting the focus back on yourself, right? So you're putting the focus on you rather than on the student. And so, you know, just do that really quiet correction, move forward, that's enough. Don't take time kind of focusing on what you've done wrong. But also, again, make sure that you follow up with the student later and say, hey, I'm really sorry. I'm going to try to do better. Do you have, you know, suggestions for how I could have better handled that? So again, empowering the student to make sure that they get input in how you act in those situations in the future. And then again, just practice to try to avoid making that same mistake. So if you have, you know, knowingly have a non-binary student that uses they, them, or ZZer pronouns, just have a practice conversation in your head or out loud where you're talking to or referring to that student. If you have a colleague that also has that student, like get together and just have that conversation so that you can really practice those things. I see a question in the chat about, okay, so all of this is kind of focused on in person. What about if it's an online asynchronous discussion? That's where I do think, stepping in and actually, so if it's a discussion board, stepping in and leaving a message that says, hey, that kind of terminology can be a little bit problematic. Here are some resources why. So it's a little bit harder to engage in the full conversation there. That's where you may want to be a little bit more direct, but also kind of pointing them to resources and really making them feel like this is a thing that anyone can do. Terminology changes all the time. This isn't, saying anything about you as a person. It's just, hey, here are some, different terminology that you may want to use in the future, but also if you have students in there that may have been negatively impacted, still doing that individual reach out to make sure that they're doing okay and asking, hey, is there anything else that you would like me to do in the future? And yeah, sending up that follow-up email, right? So the discussion board is kind of so that everyone's on the same page, but in case that student just types their response and knows they've gotten their points and never comes back, sending an email follow-up is really useful as well. So this is a slide that's in the resources. I don't think we have time to necessarily do this now, but this is a good kind of starting point if you want to think about this kind of as a hypothetical in your course, right? So just imagine that this is a thing that a student says in your class. How would you manage that situation? What would you do? What might the conversation look like? And, talk about this with other instructors or think about it on your own. This is just kind of a good way of thinking through that. So with that, that is the end of our presentation. So if you're willing, I highly recommend posting in the chat and sharing what are one or two things that you could do to really implement this in your own teaching. But otherwise, if you have questions, we're happy to take those, so you can post them in the chat or express those verbally if you would like. Oh, Sarah, yeah. How do we make safe spaces for students when our state laws explicitly state the opposite? That's tough. And that's where just saying, maybe you don't explicitly refer to gender identity and sexual orientation, but saying, I support all students in bringing their full selves into this space. I want you to feel comfortable. I want you to be able to express yourself. And, posting your own pronouns, is still should theoretically be a thing that's not violating those laws. Although I know in some places that can be seen as explicitly supporting the LGBT community and can be held against you. So, I think just saying how much you support your students and reiterating that over and over again can really help. Having a diversity statement that says I welcome all students can go a really long way. I don't know, Abby, do you have other thoughts on that?
I mean, I think you talked about it, kind of covered it really well. So yeah, I want to make sure that we're leaving as much time as we can for any questions that people have here at the end. So feel free to kind of speak up or throw your questions in the chat. Some great tips in the chat. Great things that you can do.
Yeah, posting pronouns is really like the simplest, easiest, and impactful thing you can do. And adding them in Zoom, adding them, at our university, we got the ability to add them in our learning management system, so they're automatically showing up in Canvas. So every time students log in and they're seeing posts from their instructors, they can see those pronouns right there as well.
in addition to pronouns, Amy, the preferred name issue in Canvas is not perfect. So this is the reason I posted our recommendation to Instructure that they make some changes to make it a bit easier. But any Canvas administrators in the room, you know, you have to sync your student naming conventions in your SIS with Canvas. So each time this student enrolls, it's automatically passed to Canvas in the correct manner. And some of these students in transition may not know yet. They may not be ready to make that name change, but mid-semester they will be. So generally the solution is to offer something for the students to push their preferred name to the SIS, and then that passes to Canvas through middleware. Bit technical, but it's kind of described in the document I shared. And if you can help us lobby Instructure to make those changes for the benefit of our students, we would appreciate it.
Yeah, and the name part is, you know, where it gets tricky as well, because even if students, you know, post their name and it gets, you know, put through to Canvas, that can be really anxiety provoking, because they may be in a situation where I want this used internally, but I sure don't want my parents to know that I'm going by this name. So yeah, giving them the opportunity to go by a different name in class than they have, you know, officially at the university, or even, you know, informally through that Canvas system, like even that can feel a little bit too official. So just giving them the opportunity to go by whatever name they want in this particular space can be really, really useful for our students.
Well, we've reached the end of the time slot, but I'd like to thank Amy and Abby for a really fantastic presentation on a topic that doesn't get enough attention. So thank you so much for proposing it and sharing with us today. I've already put a link to your slides on the conference website. And because it's a local one at University of Nevada and Nebraska, Lincoln, if you want, I can also make a local copy in our Google Drive so it persists if any of you move on to other institutions, but we can handle that offline. So I'm going to turn off the recording and then hand over the reins to the next moderator, but everyone please join me in thanking Amy and Abby for a fantastic presentation.